Not required to, but if you have access to it and would like to follow along, we're currently in the OneNote file of modal node system, MNS presentation 1233, OneNote, negative modal distance versus inverse intervals, major modes, the list of the presentations on the right. We plan on adding plenty more to them shortly. Also noting, in this OneNote presentation, we're going to spend all of our time on the music theory side of things, but we have a similarly numbered and named presentation where we actually build the tables in Excel, practicing music, Excel, and table visualization at the same time. We're going to be continuing our discussion of distance, looking at intervals, in particular addressing the problem of going in the counterclockwise direction, the negative direction, looking at an option that actually makes more sense. So to get an idea of that, let's recap our visualization that we want to have in our mind. What are we trying to do here? Navigate the fretboard. What do we need in order to navigate the fretboard? We need directionality as well as distance terminology. Why? Because the best way to visualize the fretboard is as a map of the territory, like the globe, having 7 continent type locations and 5 other locations which are non-continent locations like the oceans. We go through them to get to the continent type of locations. Our head is above the fretboard, like being in space above this low or heavy E string, the one closest to the ceiling. As we look down on the fretboard, we notice that it can spin around like the Earth can, providing 12 degrees of rotation. We're going to be naming those with the 12 notes in the musical alphabet, typically working in the 4th degree of rotation, that being the C major and related collection of 7 notes. Noting we could work in C sharp, D, D sharp, and so on and so forth. The whole thing would just shift up. Therefore, once we've decided on the collection of notes, the 1 through 12, we no longer want to list things out by the note name, but by the permanent continent names, which is equivalent to the Nashville number systems, if you're familiar with that system, which is basically just giving a number to the modes, meaning the 1 is the Ionian, the 4 is the Lydian, the 6 is the Aeolian, the 5 is the Mixolydian, and so on and so forth. Now, if we visualize this on one string, we can imagine that string goes up and down like a number line, infinitely up and infinitely back. But at the same time, if we were to wrap that string around in a circle, we can also imagine that there is repetition, 12 notes, and then it repeats from an octave perspective. We're not going to get into the idea of octaves going up and down in an infinitely distance perspective. We'll talk more about that later. Right now, we're still visualizing it as basically a track. You can go around the NASCAR track, around and around in a circle. We can't go across the middle of the circle. And in NASCAR, you can only go one way, right, around the circle. But here, we can go directionally backwards. So if I'm moving around on the guitar, if you think about one string, I can go upwards, I can go backwards, I can also go physically upwards in space, but that's going to another string above it. That's actually going down in pitch. So that's still, from a tonal standpoint, is directional. I'm going up or I'm going back. So we imagine we go around in a circle here. If I'm on this number 3 continent, and I want to get to like this 7, how far away is that? I can count continents, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 4 continents away, which I would call 4 modal half steps away. If I make this the 1, we can use scale degrees. That's now not a 3, it's a 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It would be the 5th scale degree. I could also add the oceans. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 away, including the oceans. That would be like going how many notes away. Now, I can also go backwards, however. So I could go 1, 2, 3 backwards. That would be negative 3 modal half steps, which you would expect to be, if I made that the 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, negative 4th scale degree. Some people do use negative scale degrees, but it doesn't make complete sense because it's not actually symmetrical. So as we discussed in prior presentations, it's more likely that you want to be thinking about going backwards if using the normal convention terminology by adding the notes. Meaning if I go from here to here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that would be a 5-note away, which we typically call a perfect fourth because it would be 1, 2, 3, 4 scale degrees, or 1, 2, 3 modal half steps up. But if I go from here back to here, I can clearly see that that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, negative 5 notes back, or 1, 2, 3, negative 3 modal half steps back, or if I make that the 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, negative 4 scale degree back. But we don't usually say negative 4 scale degrees. Instead, we take the inverse distance, which is going to be 5 minus 12, which is 7. So even though I'm going back 5, I call it a 7-note away, and I would call it a negative 7-note away, and then call it a perfect fifth. Because normally we think about going clockwise, 5, 6, 7. Now that works. You can use that terminology, but notice it doesn't really make a lot of sense because the second term doesn't tell you anything about the scale degree term is wrong because you would think it would be going in the negative direction on the scale degrees. That's just how it is because of the misconception, in my opinion, of the measuring. So now we're going to think about, well, what would it be like if we had a system that would be completely logical? If it was totally logical, I should be able to measure going forward and going backwards, and in a way that I can see the directionality. If I go so many steps around the circle this way, and there's 7 steps, I can take 7 minus that to determine how many I go around the other way, whether I'm talking about the 12 notes equivalent to the continents and the oceans, or talking about the continent locations, which are equivalent to the modal half steps. So let me show you what I mean. So in prior presentations, we took a look at the fact that we have 12 notes. We pick out 7 of those notes using our formula. We're starting on the C here, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. That gives us our 7 notes. We're working in the key of C all the time, but remember, we can copy and paste this to any of the 12 collection of 7 notes, and the distances will all remain the same because it's just like the planet rotating around to 12 degrees. 12 different degrees. They also, the distance between the continents and the oceans and whatnot are all the same once you determine what degree you're looking at. So we then thought that normally we go forward. If you're just going forward within 1 octave, like a NASCAR track going clockwise around the track, you've only got 11 different ways that you can view 11 different intervals that you have, distances from any one point. You can measure 11 different distances, right? And we named those based on the major scale. The problem with the measurement, if we take like the major third over here, is that usually they drop the notes, which is the distance that is the most important, which I would recommend adding back. And if you add it back, the middle term, the M in this case, becomes basically irrelevant, because I'd rather know that it's in the major scale, meaning if I start from an Ionian node and go 4 notes up, I land on a continent and not in the ocean, not because there's an M here, but because I went 4 notes up. I would also like that to be the thing that triggers in my mind the quality of what the tone is going to be, not the fact that there's an M next to it. And the third here we can see also is a scale degree, which from a measurement standpoint is off by 1, because we should be measuring from this point, if you're starting from here, not including that as one of the measurement nodes. Why? Because when we go backwards, it causes a problem. So we in a prior presentation said, well, what if I go from the 0 backwards? Well, then what happens is you get a negative 1 step backwards. But what am I going to call it in terms of the interval? Well, I would recommend keep calling it a major 7, even though the major 7 doesn't make sense. You would think it would be a negative second something, right? So, but you're going to keep it as a major 7. How do I know it's a major 7? Because I'm going to take 12 minus the 1 backwards would be 11 forwards. Therefore, I'm going to say the major 7 could either be 11 forward or 1 backwards. Problem with that is that the 7th scale degree doesn't make any sense in this context. It's just, you just memorize it. That's just the tag we have for that distance. What would be a better system? It would be something like this, right? We would say, okay, if I'm going, let's do it this way. I got to go from the bottom. I'm going 1 step back. So I'm starting at 0, meaning I'm not going anywhere. If I look at it from this perspective of the Ionian, it would be a 0 node away, 0 modal half step. And then instead of going forward or clockwise, we go counterclockwise. So that means we would take 1 step back. So if I was on the Ionian and I go 1 modal step back, we get to the Locrian. If I was on the Ionian and I go 1 note step back, I once again get to the Locrian. I land on a continent. Remember, if I go 1 step forward, I don't land on a continent. If I go 1 note forward, I land in the ocean. But if I go 1 note backwards, I land on the continent. So distance makes a difference. I mean, directionality makes a difference, right? It's not going to be the same going backwards as forwards, obviously, because it's not totally. So we're going to say then that would be an IN modal range. So I'm still going to call that an IN modal range. I'm not going to now call it an NI modal range because I'm perceiving myself moving counterclockwise from the I to the N, not from the N to the I, even though I'm going down or counterclockwise pitchwise. So I'm still going to call it an IN modal range, which would be a 1-7 modal range, recognizing that there's 2 directionalities I could have in a similar way as I would propose you see the intervals like a major 7 being able to go forward 11 and backwards 1. Would be more logical to name the 2 points and say, how do I get from the Ionian to the Locrian continents? Well, we don't need to turn left, turn right, or anything because we can only go clockwise or counterclockwise around the loop. So either you're going to go forwards 11 or you go backwards 1. So the easiest way would go from the I back to the N, or the 7, the 1 back to the 7, because there's only 7 of the locations. So it would be a -1 Ionian first modal half step. I'm imagining that negative is flowing all the way through so that we don't have to put 2 negatives. So that 1 here is also a -1. -1 from the Ionian node, negative first modal half step, which would be the -2nd scale degree, which some people use, but we don't have a -2nd scale degree because, again, the scale degrees fall apart when you go backwards. Therefore, we're going to keep the terminology -1 major 7, which is obviously quite weird. This one makes sense because if I take the inverse, or if I go around clockwise, it would be 12 minus 1 would be 11, and 7 minus 1 would be 6. So going the other way